The smallest warning can change the fate of the most powerful man in the room. My name is Ethan Brooks, and until that Thursday night, I believed my life would always fit inside the polished walls of Belmore's Steakhouse on the edge of downtown Chicago. I was 24, worked 5 dinner shifts a week, picked up extra lunches whenever someone called in sick, and measured success by whether my tips were enough to cover next month's rent before the due date arrived. My world was predictable. Memorize the specials, keep the glasses full, smile even when customers didn't smile back, and remember that invisible people usually survive the longest. Belmore's attracted celebrities, executives, politicians, and people whose names never appeared in newspapers even though everyone quietly knew they held more influence than elected officials. The staff had one rule that mattered above everything else. Never stare at important guests. Never ask questions. Never remember faces. That evening the restaurant felt different the moment the front doors opened. Conversations softened without anyone asking. A valet hurried across the entrance. The maitre d' straightened his jacket twice before greeting the arriving party. Adrian Moretti stepped inside with 3 associates, wearing a charcoal suit without a single wrinkle, his expression calm enough to make the entire dining room seem louder by comparison. I had heard whispers about him for years. Some called him a businessman. Others lowered their voices before saying his last name. No one ever agreed on what he actually owned, only that people rarely told him no twice. He wasn't surrounded by obvious bodyguards. He didn't need to be. Confidence followed him more closely than any security detail could. I carried a tray toward table 14, pretending nothing had changed while every employee suddenly moved with perfect precision. Adrian thanked me when I poured sparkling water, his voice steady, polite, almost ordinary. That surprised me more than anything. Powerful men usually expected the room to orbit around them. He barely looked up from the menu. I should have walked away, finished my section, and forgotten him before the end of the shift. Instead, something caught my attention in the reflection of the dining room's antique mirror behind the wine display. A man sitting alone near the back hadn't touched his meal once. His eyes never followed the servers or the music drifting through the speakers. They remained fixed on Adrian. He adjusted his jacket just enough for a dark metal object clipped inside to become visible for less than a second before disappearing again. My pulse stumbled. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it was a phone, a medical device, anything harmless. But every instinct told me the same thing. Something was wrong. The receipt printer beside the service station suddenly came alive with its familiar mechanical buzz. I tore off the fresh guest check, grabbed a pen from my apron, and before I could convince myself to stay out of it, I wrote 7 words that would change everything. Gunman behind you. Don't turn around. My fingers trembled only after I slid the folded guest check beside Adrian Moretti's untouched glass of sparkling water. Until that moment, instinct had carried me forward faster than fear ever could. I lowered my eyes the way every server was trained to do, quietly saying, "Whenever you are ready, sir," before stepping back with the empty confidence of someone pretending everything was perfectly normal. From across the dining room, I watched him reach for the bill without the slightest hint of urgency. His expression remained unreadable as he unfolded the paper. His eyes moved across the handwritten sentence once, then a second time. Nothing changed. No widened eyes. No sudden movement. No startled glance over his shoulder. Instead, he calmly placed the receipt beside his plate, picked up his water glass, and took a slow sip as though he had just reviewed the dessert menu. For one impossible moment I wondered if he thought I was playing some ridiculous prank. Then I noticed something else. His right hand rested casually on the edge of the table, and one finger tapped the polished wood exactly 3 times. It was almost invisible, too subtle for any ordinary guest to notice. Yet within seconds, one of the men seated several tables away quietly stood, adjusted his tie, and walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms without looking at Adrian once. Another customer finished his coffee, left several bills beneath the cup, and exited through the front door with perfect composure. They looked like strangers, but they moved with quiet purpose, like pieces on a chessboard responding to a signal only they understood. The dining room never erupted into panic. Soft jazz still floated through the speakers. Steaks continued to sizzle as they crossed the kitchen pass. Couples laughed over anniversary dinners while business partners discussed contracts worth more money than I would earn in a lifetime. Yet beneath that ordinary evening, an invisible current had begun flowing in a completely different direction. The man near the back finally shifted in his chair. His attention never left Adrian. I forced myself to continue serving nearby tables, refilling iced tea, delivering mashed potatoes, thanking guests for their patience, all while stealing brief glances through reflections in the restaurant's decorative mirrors instead of turning my head directly. Every second felt heavier than the last. Then the suspicious man slowly reached inside his jacket again, paused, frowned almost imperceptibly, and looked around the room for the first time. His confidence had disappeared. Whatever he expected to happen had not happened. Less than 10 seconds later, he quietly stood, placed cash beside his untouched tray, and walked toward the exit. Before he reached the front doors, two well-dressed men who had looked like ordinary diners politely intercepted him. They exchanged only a few quiet words before all three disappeared outside into the cool Chicago night. No raised voices followed. No shattered glass. No frightened screams. It happened so cleanly that most guests never even noticed anyone had left. I released a breath I had not realized I was holding until a calm voice behind me said, "Mr. Brooks, Mr. Moretti would appreciate a private conversation before you clock out." I turned slowly and found the restaurant manager staring at me with a pale face that somehow looked far more frightened than mine. The restaurant manager did not wait for my answer. He simply turned and walked toward the private hallway reserved for executive meetings, expecting me to follow. Every step felt strangely detached, as though I were watching someone else wear my uniform and walk across the polished hardwood floor. My shift should have ended with stacking clean glasses and counting tip receipts, not with being summoned by the most influential guest Belmore's had hosted all year. The hallway seemed quieter than the dining room, muting the laughter and clinking silverware behind heavy oak doors. At the end stood a small conference suite usually reserved for corporate clients who wanted privacy. The manager opened the door, nodded once, and quietly disappeared before I could ask a single question. Adrian Moretti stood alone beside a wide window overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city lights reflected against the glass, making it difficult to tell where the buildings ended and his silhouette began. His suit jacket rested neatly over the back of a chair, but everything else about him remained perfectly composed. He looked toward me with the same calm expression he had worn while reading my handwritten warning. "Close the door, Mr. Brooks," he said in a voice that never needed to become louder to command attention. I obeyed without thinking. The soft click of the lock suddenly made the room feel much smaller. For several seconds neither of us spoke. He studied me the way someone might examine an unfamiliar map, searching for details that were not immediately obvious. Finally he asked, "How did you know?" It was not an accusation. It was simple curiosity. I swallowed carefully before answering. "I did not know. I noticed someone watching you instead of enjoying dinner. He kept checking your table through the mirror. Then I saw something inside his jacket. It did not feel right." Adrian remained silent. "You risked your job over a feeling?" he asked. "I risked writing one sentence," I replied honestly. "If I was wrong, I expected you would throw the receipt away." For the first time that evening, something almost resembling amusement crossed his face before disappearing again. "Most people protect themselves first," he said quietly. "You protected a stranger." I looked down at my shoes. Maybe. Or maybe I just hoped everyone could finish dinner and go home safely. Another long silence settled between us. Then the door opened without anyone knocking. A silver-haired man wearing an immaculate navy suit entered carrying a thin leather folder. He glanced at me briefly before handing the folder to Adrian. Adrian flipped through several pages with practiced efficiency. His eyes paused once before closing the folder again. "Interesting," he murmured. My stomach tightened. He looked directly at me once more. "Mr. Brooks, according to everything we have been able to verify in the last 20 minutes, you are exactly who you claim to be. No criminal history. No outstanding debt. No hidden business partners. No connection to my world whatsoever." I blinked in disbelief. 20 minutes. They had learned more about my life in 20 minutes than most people knew after years. Adrian placed the folder on the conference table. "Which creates a far more interesting question," he said. "If you truly have no connection to us, why did someone spend the entire evening watching you almost as closely as they were watching me?" For several seconds I could not answer. The question echoed through my mind long after Adrian finished speaking. Someone had been watching me? That made no sense. I had spent the last 4 years following the same routine. I rented a modest apartment on the north side of the city, worked double shifts whenever possible, called my mother every Sunday afternoon, and occasionally met my best friend Caleb for coffee when our schedules happened to match. There was nothing mysterious about my life. Nothing worth following. "There has to be a mistake," I finally said. "I am just a waiter." Adrian folded his hands in front of him. The people who create the biggest surprises often begin with that sentence. The silver-haired man standing beside the conference table opened the leather folder again and slid a single photograph across the polished surface. It had clearly been taken earlier that evening. I recognized myself immediately, carrying a tray through the dining room. At first I wondered why he was showing me an ordinary picture from my shift. Then I noticed the background. Near the restaurant entrance stood the same solitary customer who had unsettled me before. He was not looking toward Adrian's table. He was looking directly at me. The expression on his face was calm, patient, almost as though he had already found the person he had come to see. A chill ran through me. "I never noticed him watching me," I whispered. "That is because you were busy doing your job," Adrian replied. "My security team was busy watching everyone else." The older man spoke for the first time. "We reviewed every available camera angle before inviting you here. The pattern is consistent." He observed Mr. Moretti, but every few minutes his attention returned to you. I stared at the photograph, trying to remember whether I had ever seen the stranger before tonight. His face triggered nothing. No memory. No familiar feeling. Just another customer among hundreds who passed through Belmore's every week. "Do you have family in Chicago?" Adrian asked. "Only me," I answered. "My parents live in Indiana. My younger sister teaches elementary school outside Indianapolis." "Any relatives connected to law enforcement, politics, or organized crime?" I almost laughed at how absurd the question sounded. "No. My father repairs heating systems. My mother worked at a public library before retiring." Adrian nodded thoughtfully, as though every answer only deepened the mystery instead of solving it. His phone vibrated once on the conference table. He glanced at the screen before handing it to the silver-haired man. The older gentleman read the message, and for the first time his composed expression shifted. "The individual we escorted from the restaurant disappeared before our team could identify him," he said quietly. "He left behind no vehicle, no credit card record, and no confirmed identity." Adrian looked back at me with calm, unwavering eyes. That was not the behavior of an impulsive man. It was the behavior of someone who planned every exit before entering the building. I felt my heartbeat quicken again. "So what happens now?" Adrian walked toward the window and looked out over the glowing skyline below. "Now," he said without turning around, "we find out why a complete stranger spent an entire evening waiting for the exact moment our paths crossed, because I no longer believe that meeting was an accident. Adrian insisted that I leave through the employee entrance instead of the front door. He said it casually, almost like friendly advice, but something in his tone made it clear this was not a suggestion. Outside, the cool Chicago air felt unusually quiet after the steady noise of the restaurant. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few employees gathering their coats before heading home. I instinctively reached for my car keys, but the silver-haired man stepped beside me. "Mr. Brooks," he said politely, "would you mind waiting just a moment?" Before I could answer, two dark sedans rolled slowly into the alley behind the building. They were ordinary enough to blend into city traffic, yet they arrived with such perfect timing that they immediately caught my attention. Adrian emerged a few seconds later, slipping on his suit jacket as though the evening had ended exactly as planned. "You live alone," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. That changes tonight." I frowned. "I appreciate your concern, but I think you are overreacting." Whoever that man was, he left. "I will go home, lock my apartment door, and tomorrow I will come back to work." Adrian studied me for a long moment before speaking again. "Do you know what the most dangerous mistake people make?" I shook my head. Believing that because they do not understand someone else's plan, the plan has already failed. His words lingered in the silence between us. I wanted to dismiss them, to laugh and convince myself that this strange evening was finally ending. Instead, my phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen displayed an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" There was only silence. Not static. Not breathing. Just complete silence. After several seconds the call disconnected. Almost immediately another notification appeared. This time it was a text message from another unfamiliar number. There were only 5 words. "We finally found you, Ethan." My blood seemed to turn cold. I stared at the screen, reading the sentence again and again, hoping I had misunderstood it. "Show me," Adrian said quietly. I handed him the phone without speaking. He read the message once, then passed it to the silver-haired man, whose calm expression disappeared for the first time that night. "There was no way anyone should have obtained this number," the older man murmured. Adrian looked directly at me. "Have you shared your location with anyone today?" "No." "Have you posted photographs online?" "I barely use social media." He nodded slowly, almost as though my answers confirmed something he had already suspected. "Then they were not searching for your phone," he said. "They were searching for you." My heartbeat pounded louder with every passing second. Everything that had seemed impossible only minutes earlier was becoming frighteningly real. Adrian opened the rear door of one of the waiting sedans. "Mr. Brooks," he said in the same calm voice he had used all evening, "until we understand why someone believes you are worth finding, you are not going home alone." I looked toward my aging sedan parked beneath the dim parking lot lights, then back at the waiting car. For the first time since this unbelievable night had begun, I realized my ordinary life might already be over, and I had not even noticed the exact moment it disappeared. The ride across Chicago was quieter than any drive I had ever taken. The sedan moved smoothly through late-night traffic while the city lights reflected across the tinted windows, turning familiar streets into something distant and unreal. Adrian sat beside me without checking his phone or speaking to anyone. The silver-haired man occupied the front passenger seat, occasionally exchanging brief messages with someone through a secure tablet. No one appeared nervous, yet every movement inside the vehicle carried quiet purpose. I finally broke the silence. "Where are we going?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "Somewhere no one expects you to be." I looked out the window again, trying to recognize the route, but after several turns I completely lost my sense of direction. 20 minutes later the sedan entered the underground garage of a modern glass tower overlooking the Chicago River. There were no company logos, no signs identifying the building, only polished concrete, bright lighting, and security cameras positioned with obvious intention. An elevator opened before we even reached it, as though someone had been expecting our arrival. We stepped into a spacious private residence occupying the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city stretching for miles beneath the midnight sky. The space was elegant without feeling extravagant, decorated in warm gray tones, natural wood, and carefully selected artwork instead of unnecessary displays of wealth. It looked less like the home of a feared businessman and more like the apartment of someone who valued order above everything else. "You may stay here tonight," Adrian said. "A guest room has already been prepared." I stared at him in disbelief. "You planned this before I agreed to come." A faint smile crossed his face. "I planned for every reasonable outcome." Before I could respond, the silver-haired man approached carrying another folder. "We completed an expanded background review," he said. "There is still nothing unusual regarding Mr. Brooks. Employment history, school records, medical records, financial accounts, everything appears remarkably ordinary." Adrian accepted the folder but did not open it immediately. Instead, he looked directly at me. "Tell me about your childhood." The question caught me off guard. There is not much to tell. I grew up in a small town outside Indianapolis. My father repaired heating and cooling systems. My mother loved books. We never had much money, but we had enough. Any missing years? Foster care? Adoption? I frowned. No. Then I paused. Actually, there is one thing. Both men looked at me without interrupting. When I was about 6 years old, my parents told me we moved after a house fire. I barely remember the old neighborhood. Most family photographs from before that time were destroyed. Adrian exchanged a brief glance with the silver-haired man. It lasted less than a second, but I noticed it. "What?" I asked. The older man quietly opened the folder and removed a faded photograph. It showed a suburban neighborhood taken many years ago. One house had been circled in red ink. "This address," he said carefully, "matches the location your family reportedly left after the fire." I nodded slowly. "Yes. That is what my parents always said." Adrian placed the photograph beside another document on the table. "There is only one problem," he said calmly. "According to every public record we could locate tonight, no fire was ever reported at that address, and officially, your family never lived there at all." Early the next morning I stood alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the first light spread across the Chicago skyline while questions circled through my mind faster than I could answer them. I had tried calling my parents twice before sunrise, but both calls went directly to voicemail. That had never happened before. My mother always answered before the second ring, even if it was only to remind me that I worried too much. I told myself they were probably still asleep, yet a quiet uneasiness settled deeper with every passing minute. Behind me, I heard the elevator doors open. The silver-haired man entered carrying a cardboard storage box that looked strangely ordinary compared to everything else I had seen since arriving. Adrian followed a few steps later, his expression as composed as ever. "We located archived material connected to the address in your childhood records," the older man said as he placed the box on the dining table. Inside were faded neighborhood newsletters, old property maps, and photographs collected from local historical organizations. None of them showed any sign of a house fire. Instead, one aerial photograph captured the entire street exactly as I remembered it from distant childhood memories. The large oak tree stood in the front yard. The white mailbox remained beside the sidewalk. Even the blue bicycle leaning against the garage looked strangely familiar. "That cannot be right," I whispered. "If the house never burned down, why would my parents tell me it did?" Adrian carefully lifted a yellowed newspaper clipping from the bottom of the box. Perhaps because another event happened there instead. The article had no dramatic headline. It described a federal investigation involving financial fraud connected to a local development company more than 18 years earlier. Several names appeared throughout the story, but none meant anything to me until Adrian pointed toward one in particular. "This man disappeared 6 months after the article was published," he said. "No confirmed sightings since." I looked closer. Something about the accompanying photograph tugged at my memory. Not enough to recognize him, only enough to create an uncomfortable feeling that I had seen his face somewhere long ago. Before I could speak, the silver-haired man placed another item on the table. It was an elementary school yearbook from the same town where I had supposedly grown up. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages until I reached first grade. There I was, smiling awkwardly in the front row exactly as expected. But the student standing beside me made my breath catch. His face belonged to the stranger who had watched me inside Belmore's restaurant, only much younger. I stared at the photograph, unable to process what I was seeing. "That is impossible," I said quietly. "He was there when I was a child." Adrian's calm voice broke the silence. "Which means he did not find you by accident this week." He paused before adding the sentence that made every memory from my childhood suddenly feel uncertain. "He has been looking for you for almost 20 years. The discovery left the room completely silent. I kept staring at the yearbook photograph, searching for some detail that would prove we were all mistaken, but every feature matched the man from the restaurant. The same sharp jawline. The same steady eyes. Only the years separated the child from the adult. "Who is he?" I finally asked. The silver-haired man shook his head. "We still do not know his current identity. Every record connected to him ends shortly after this photograph was taken. It is as if he disappeared and someone erased the trail." Adrian remained thoughtful instead of surprised. "People erase records for only 2 reasons," he said quietly. "To hide from someone, or to prepare for something." Before anyone could continue, another secure message arrived on the tablet resting beside the folder. The older man read it, then immediately looked toward Adrian. "Our investigators found something unusual at Mr. Brooks's apartment." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "Nothing was taken," he answered. "Nothing was damaged. The neighbors reported seeing a maintenance worker enter the building early this morning, but the property manager confirms no repairs were scheduled." Adrian did not ask another question. He already understood the implication. "Someone wanted access without attracting attention," he said. "Did they recover surveillance footage?" The older man nodded. "Only partial footage. The individual wore a cap that obscured most facial features. However, before leaving, he placed an envelope inside Mr. Brooks's apartment." I stared at him in disbelief. "An envelope?" "Yes." Within an hour, the envelope had been delivered to the penthouse by Adrian's security team. It was completely unmarked except for my name written neatly across the front. I recognized neither the handwriting nor the cream-colored stationery. Adrian slid it across the table but did not open it. "It belongs to you." My fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. Inside rested a single folded sheet of paper and an old brass key attached to a faded blue tag. Written across the paper were only 2 sentences. "If you want the truth, stop trusting the story your parents told you. Locker 214. Union Station. Noon tomorrow." No signature appeared beneath the message. No explanation. Nothing else. I looked up slowly. "This has to be a trap." Adrian gave a slight nod. "Almost certainly." "Then we should ignore it." He surprised me by shaking his head. "No. Whoever sent this has waited nearly 20 years to reach you. They could have contacted you at any point before now. Instead, they waited until after our meeting at the restaurant." He walked toward the windows overlooking the river before continuing. "That means something changed last night." I looked down at the old brass key resting in my palm. Its worn edges suggested years of use. It did not feel like something purchased yesterday simply to lure me somewhere. It felt personal. Familiar in a way I could not explain. Then another memory surfaced without warning. I was no older than 6, sitting inside a moving car while my mother turned around from the front seat and gently pressed a small brass key into my hand. I could not remember what she said next. The memory vanished before I could reach it. I closed my fingers around the key, realizing with growing certainty that whoever had left the envelope knew something about my childhood that even I had forgotten. And for the first time I wondered whether the answers I had been chasing might be waiting inside locker 214 instead of inside my family's carefully protected past. At 11:45 the next morning, Adrian and I entered Chicago Union Station through different entrances exactly as planned. He insisted that I walk alone for the final 100 feet, blending into the steady stream of commuters carrying coffee cups, backpacks, and rolling suitcases. Nothing about the station suggested that the next few minutes could answer questions buried for nearly 2 decades. Locker 214 stood against a long row of identical steel doors near the baggage area. My heart pounded as I removed the worn brass key from my pocket. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in my ears. Inside rested a small canvas pouch and a sealed envelope addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately. It belonged to my mother. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. Ethan, if you are reading this, then the promise we made can no longer protect you. We never lied because we wanted to. We lied because we believed one ordinary life was worth more than any dangerous truth. You were never the person they searched for because of something you did. You were the child who witnessed something powerful people wanted erased forever. We changed addresses, records, and memories to give you a future untouched by their world. If that future has finally caught up with you, remember only one thing. Trust the man who protects your future more than the one who explains your past. Tears blurred the final lines before I reached into the canvas pouch. Inside was a faded family photograph that I had never seen before. Standing beside my parents was a younger Adrian Moretti, dressed casually, smiling in a way I had never imagined possible. He looked almost like an older brother instead of the composed man who now stood somewhere inside the station watching from a distance. Before I could process the image, Adrian quietly approached without attracting attention. I held up the photograph. You knew my parents. He nodded once. A long time ago. Why did you never tell me? His answer came without hesitation. Because I wanted you to discover the truth through your family's voice before hearing it through mine. I looked back at my mother's letter. Suddenly every decision she had made carried a different meaning. The move. The missing photographs. The quiet insistence that kindness mattered more than fear. None of it had been random. She and my father had sacrificed certainty so I could grow up believing I was ordinary. Adrian looked toward the busy station where thousands of strangers continued walking, completely unaware that one forgotten locker had just rewritten someone else's life. You saved me with 7 handwritten words, he said calmly. Today your mother returned the favor with 7 pages of truth. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. For the first time since that unforgettable night at Belmore's, the fear that had followed me began to fade. I still did not know every answer, and perhaps I never would. But I finally understood that courage was not always standing in front of danger. Sometimes courage was protecting someone else's chance to live an ordinary life without ever asking for recognition. As Adrian and I walked out of Union Station into the bright Chicago afternoon, I realized that a simple decision made during an ordinary dinner shift had not only changed the course of one evening. It had quietly reunited 2 unfinished stories that had been waiting almost 20 years to find each other again.